Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to do a final wrap up for the month of March. I did do a mid-month wrap up, and I'll go ahead and link that in case you haven't watched it. So that way you can check that out. I think I read 6 books in the first half of the month, so if you want to hear my thoughts on those books, go ahead and check that out. This video, I'm primarily just going to be talking about the 5 books that I completed in the second half of the month. But for the month, I did have 2 5-stars, 6 4-stars, 2 3-stars, and a DNF. So I actually feel like it was a pretty good reading month. Out of the 11 books that I read, well, 10 books that I completed and 1 DNF. One of those was a classic. 7 of those were middle grade, 2 were adult books, and 1 was a nonfiction. So I feel like I read a lot of middle grade for middle grade March. So I did participate in that. I think I actually fulfilled every single prompt, but I didn't get to the group read. So you can't have it all. And then I also participated in Readathon. So I participated in that readathon, and some of those books were middle grade books and 1 was an adult book. So that was really, really fun. So I participated in several different reading challenges this month. And I already talked to my April TBR that I'm going to be taking it way more low-key in April because it was a lot and it felt like a lot of books to read. So let's go ahead and dive into the books that I read in the second half of the month. So the first book that I completed in the second half of the month was A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. This is a nonfiction book about the author deciding to hike the Appalachian Trail. I buddy read this with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, and it was so fun reading this with her because she's actually very experienced in hiking, so she had a lot of input that I wouldn't have known, and it really helped contextually with the book, which was really cool. I like to hike, but I do like very low-key hikes, and Sandy's actually done like backpacking hikings and camping in the woods and stuff, and so she hasn't hiked like through trail like they did in this book. So not quite to that level, but she had a lot of really cool input that just really enhanced my reading of this book. This book was also on my nonfiction TBR, so I can check that off, which is cool. I really enjoyed this book. This book had a lot of humor in it, which I knew going into it. And I have to read this passage for you because I think that it really highlights kind of the style of Bill Bryson's humor and kind of what you're going to get from it. So he is doing research about the Appalachian Trail and about bear attacks, and he's reading this book all about bear attacks, which what a great thing to read before you go on this hike trail in the wilderness where there is no one around at all. He talks about the fact that no bears have attacked any humans in New Hampshire in 200 years, and that is a statistic in this book. And he says, "How foolish must one be to be reassured by the information that no bear has killed a human in Vermont or New Hampshire in 200 years? That's not because the bears have signed a treaty, you know. There's nothing to say that they won't start a modest rampage tomorrow." So I just loved his humor in this book. I thought that it was really fun. He puts a lot of history into this book about the history of the Appalachian Trail, about different national parks that they hike through, just lots of information that I thought was really interesting and helpful, but he mixes in a lot of humor, which is really good. At one point, in the last probably third of the book or so, he kind of like takes a break and then goes back to the Appalachian Trail. And when he does that, it's just not the same for the rest of the book. And both Sandy and I felt this way, that it felt like he'd lost his enthusiasm for it, and that definitely comes across in the writing. So while there was enjoyable scenes in the last like third to a quarter of a book or so, like it just didn't quite have the charm and the excitement and the appeal that the first section of the book did. So I ended up giving this book 4 stars because it was really amazing and such an enjoyable reading experience, but it did kind of like lose steam along the way. So that's why it wasn't like a perfect 5 stars, but man, this was a really fun book and definitely one I'd like to return to. I have a couple of other Bill Bryson books that I've picked up at thrift stores, and it makes me really excited to pick up more books from him because now I kind of know what to expect with his writing style. I love how informative it is, yet so infused with humor. That just made it such a joy to read. So the next book that I read this month was actually my DNF, and unfortunately that was The Line Tender by Kate Allen. I was really looking forward to reading this book because I love the cover of it, and when you're reading the book, there is just amazing illustrations at the beginning of every single chapter. I thought that the illustrations were gorgeous and just like added a lot to it. I struggled with the writing of this book. So the book is set, the main character lives in Massachusetts. Her mother was a marine biologist and has passed away. So I know that this book definitely probably deals very heavily with grief, but I didn't get too much into that part before I ended up DNFing it. And it's one that I might return to at some point. I just had a list of books like a mile long that I wanted to read, and the writing in this book just wasn't working for me, and actually kind of felt a bit cringy, which makes me really sad. I'm going to give you an example. If you follow me on Goodreads, you've probably already seen this example, but this was the worst example of how cringy I found the writing. But there were other things like this that weren't quite as terrible. So it says, I had the urge to run over and kiss him, but I quickly stuffed it back in like a tampon flying out of my backpack. And I was just like, what? What child thinks this way? And it's like a crush that she has like on her best friend, but for the first, like, you know, that was page 63. Up until that point, there's no hint that she has any feelings for him at all. And then all of a sudden, there's that flying out like a tampon flying out of a backpack. What? So there were other examples, and I would read a sentence like that and just be like, what? And it would just completely pull me out of the story. So I decided to DNF it because it was just too distracting for me. It is one that I wouldn't mind returning to at a certain point, so it's maybe not necessarily a permanent DNF. I just had other books I would rather be reading, and I'm trying to be a little bit more loose with letting go of books that I'm not enjoying quite as much. Especially I had such a long list of middle grades that I really wanted to get to, so I might return to it at some point. It's also overdue at the library, so that also factored into my decision. I should also mention that The Line Tender fulfilled the prompt of a contemporary for middle grade March, but I had other books that could fulfill that prompt as well since I DNF'd that one. This one, A Ceiling Made of Eggshells by Gail Carson Levine, this was to fulfill the prompt of 5 words or more in the title. This book was really interesting. I didn't actually know at all what it was about. I just saw it was by Gail Carson Levine, who wrote Ella Enchanted, which was my favorite middle grade of last year. And the cover is just really lovely. So this book has very mixed reviews, mostly because Gail Carson Levine tends to write fantasy, and this book is not fantasy at all. It's historical fiction about Jews living in Spain right before the expulsion in 1492, which I didn't even know happened. So this book focuses on this Jewish girl, Paloma, who also goes by Loma, and her family. Her grandfather and father, mostly her grandfather, is influential with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and so they come and they do things and help the king and queen, and so by doing that, they're helping the Jews remain in good standing with the king and queen, because this also takes place during the Spanish Inquisition. So there's a lot of Christians that are being persecuted, especially if they are Christians who have converted from Judaism. Then they're being tracked down. If there's any sign whatsoever that they are like keeping any of their Jewish heritage or wanting to return to Judaism at all. And so then Jews are on very unsteady footing with the king and queen and pretty much everyone. It's just a really interesting time period. And then the king and queen end up basically forcing all of the Jews to either convert to Christianity or leave Spain in the year 1492, which I don't remember ever learning about that or reading about that in history in school. So this was a very different setting for me, and I really enjoyed this book. I felt like it was really well done. I feel like the author really captures the struggle of this girl in that time period, and then the struggle she has with like a very overbearing grandfather and her desire to marry and have children, but her grandfather wants to keep her close so that way he has her because she's a comfort to him after his wife has passed. So there's a lot of juggling of emotions here that I felt was done really, really well. I do feel like some of the content about like Jewish traditions and Christianity and stuff, I feel like a lot of that would just kind of fly over kids' heads. I feel like it was written in such a way that I don't know that middle grade age kids would like enjoy this as much maybe as an adult would, both for the culture and the pacing was really strange in this book where it's like this stuff's happening and then nothing happens for like 50 pages and then things slowly ramp up and then something happens and then we drop back off again, and that happens multiple times throughout the course of the story, and I like a slow character driven book, and so this book was great for me, but I don't know if middle graders will struggle with that. Also, there's some stuff with like the Spanish Inquisition that feels a bit intense for more sensitive children, so I would probably recommend this book for like ages 12 and up, and feel like it might be more interesting for younger teenagers and high schoolers than maybe it would be for middle graders. Particularly with some of the Spanish Inquisition stuff, there's like a scene of torture, which is not detailed, but you see all the aftermaths of like the violence on this person that was tortured. And then he's being accused of something that is kind of heinous for a middle grade book. So that didn't detract from my enjoyment of it, but it did make me be like wondering whether or not I want to pass this on to my daughter just yet, because she's only 9 and she is very tenderhearted. So keep in mind that when I'm sometimes with books, when it comes to middle grade, I'm kind of looking not just through the lens of whether or not I enjoyed it, but how it would work like for my daughter, who's kind of like in the mid-range of middle graders. So my opinion on a book might be completely different than what you think in terms of who you think it's appropriate for, but overall I really did enjoy this book. I can see why people were let down by it if they thought that there was any sort of magical element, because there's kind of like this glowing pendant in it. So from the cover, you might think that there's some sort of fantastical element or magical realism mixed in with this historical fiction, and there isn't. So I think that that is why people struggled with it so much, but I didn't even know what it was about, so I didn't really have very much disappointment with it. And then I'm so excited to announce that I have finally finished War and Peace. Oh my gosh. I was hoping to finish this book in February and I was just like, nope, it's not gonna happen. It took a lot of like brain power to get through a lot of this. Honestly, it was a much more slower read and I could have taken another full month. But I was really pushing myself to be done because I have some larger buddy reads that are coming up in April and May, and I was just like, I have to be done with this. So I actually ended up reading 600 pages of this in March, which is a lot out of a book that's over 1,300 pages. I read almost half of it in a month. And I wish probably that I had slowed it down a little bit more, and the next time that I read this, because I will reread it, I am gonna slow it down more. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. I think I'm gonna do a dedicated review for it because I spent so much time reading it that I really want a separate space to talk about it. I already did a video of like what to expect when you start War and Peace, and I would like to do just like a final thoughts video. So I'm not gonna share a ton of thoughts here because that video is going to be coming out. I haven't recorded it yet, but it is gonna be coming out, so you can look out for that. But overall, I really did enjoy a lot of this book. I enjoyed a lot of the character work. Tolstoy writes redemption so well. He writes grief and love so well, and I just really enjoyed all of that. But it goes back and forth between historical and fictional. And when we get into the historical sections, that's kind of where I struggled. I just didn't have the same connection to the Emperor and Napoleon that I did to some of the other characters. So I couldn't give it 5 stars because there were just major struggles for me in this book. Like if I hadn't been buddy reading this with someone, there's probably like 3 different places that I very easily could have DNF'd it. So thank you, Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads, for reading this book with me because you kept me going, and I'm so happy that I read it. I do want to read it again, but I think that before I read it again, not only am I going to give myself a longer length of time to get through it, but also I want to do a little bit more research on the historical aspects of this book because I think then it wouldn't feel so disjointed, because it just kind of felt jarring, the transitions between the fictional aspects of the story and the historical aspects. So I think that that would help me a little bit, but it's gonna be a while before I reread this one. And then the last book that I completed in the month of March was a graphic novel, and I loved it so much. Bear by Ben Queen and Joe Todd Stanton. I love this book. I gave it 5 stars, and it was one of my only 5 stars for the month. This one and Little Lord Fauntleroy. Everything else was a lot of 4 stars, so it was still a good reading month. But this is so sweet. So it's about Bear, who is a guide dog for a visually impaired person, and basically Bear starts losing his vision as well. And then he kind of like has this crisis of like, well, what do I do when my job is to help my humans see and I can't see? Like, what do I do? And these raccoons tell him that they know where he can get his sight back. And it is just there's a lot of humor in it, but it's really, really sweet. And he like realizes he visualizes how things are in his mind, because he can't actually see it all. And he encounters, like, this is towards the beginning of the book, he encounters this bear in a den. And because he can't see the bear, he just assumes that the bear is like him because his name is Bear, and he thinks that the den is like a human's den. And so like he envisions the bear being like him, a bigger version of himself, and he envisions them in this den. So it's really cool because it kind of shows like what he imagines along with like what is really happening, and it's just really sweet. Like, the story is so sweet, has such great representation of blindness and stuff like that, and I love that aspect of it as well. The illustrations are gorgeous, and I'm an animal lover, and so is my daughter, so we both just fell in love with this book and loved it so much. My daughter has actually read it several times, and I just read it the once, but it is wonderful. If you like graphic novels and you like animals, I think that you'll really love this. Well, that is it for the month of March. It is now over, and I actually have read more this month than I have read in any other month so far, but that's because I read a lot of middle grade, one of which is a graphic novel, and then one of those live-in books I also DNF'd. But I read a lot of middle grade, and those are shorter books, so it enables me to get more read, but I feel like I had a really good reading month this month. Not really sure what my favorite book of the month was. Probably Little Lord Fauntleroy. But I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. Did you read any good books for middle grade March? Did you participate in any fun challenges? And please tell me what your favorite read was of the month of March. I hope that you had as wonderful of a reading month as I did. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.